Welcome to the Illinois Divorce Guide podcast, where we break down the complex and emotional process of divorce into manageable, easy-to-understand steps. I'm your host, Greer Howard, and with me is Bobby Buchanan, widely recognized as one of Illinois' top divorce attorneys, offering unmatched insight and experience in family law. Well, Bobby, we are back today for another great conversation. Last time we were together, we talked about kind of ways actually to avoid having to serve papers. And today we're going to kind of reverse it. We're flipping the script a little bit. And today we're going to talk about what happens when you are served. So your spouse is serving you, and you got to be honest, a lot of people are shocked, you're upset, you probably don't know what to do. So we're going to kind of talk through all of that today. So why don't we start with Bobby? When you get served, what is the first thing that you should do?
Breathe, I think, is the first thing you should do, and know that you have some time to figure this out, and that what you see on that paper is not necessarily what you get. You know, it's really easy to get overwhelmed when you get served and kind of freak out at the things that they might be asking for in the petition, what the summons means and says, where should I file things. We're going to break it all down today so that it's a lot more accessible and people know what the next step is, really.
Yeah. So like you said, it really is so natural to be overwhelmed when you're served papers. That's certainly something that most people, when they got married, never imagined would happen. And it's such great advice, to take a breath, to stay calm. And so once you're able to kind of gather yourself and realize, hey, whatever's on this paper is not necessarily, what's going to happen, what is then the next step?
The next step is looking at the paper and figuring out first and foremost what county it is out of. And I say that because you're going to need to talk with a lawyer. You're going to need to at least have a consultation to understand what your rights and your responsibilities are. But before we dive into that, let's, again, like you said, it can be overwhelming. And I just want to acknowledge that, because this can come completely out of the blue. And we talked about last episode these ways that we can avoid serving our spouse. But we can't control our spouse. We can't control the process. And it's possible that in this occasion, this was completely out of the blue, that we didn't know this was coming at all. Or maybe we had our blinders on for a while and we ignored some signs that this was coming. Or maybe we had some conversations with our spouse about divorce and it just wasn't going anywhere. And you thought, okay, this is paused for a while. We're going to revisit divorce in the future, but for now, we're just trying to figure out our life. But for your spouse, they were still going down the road and figuring out, what do I need to do next? And they ended up hiring a lawyer without you knowing it. And that lawyer decided the first best step was to get you served. So whether it's completely out of the blue or maybe your spouse gave you a heads up, it's a big moment. And so we got to figure out what that next step is. But like I said, figure out what county it's out of, and it'll say on the documentation what court or what county, and then figure out how you're going to find that divorce lawyer, whether it's going on Google and Googling, best divorce lawyers in Cook County or DuPage County, or talking to your friend who's a lawyer and getting a referral. I would start really lining up that first phone call with an attorney, because it can help demystify what's going on here. And we're going to cover a lot of what that attorney is probably going to say in that first meeting.
Oh, real quick, you mentioned, find out what county it's in. I mean, I'm assuming most of the time, isn't it the county where you currently live with your spouse?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, sometimes in these situations, you're already separated from your spouse, and that's really the only time where you got to go, wait a minute, is this in my county or the county over where my spouse moved to, or maybe I moved to? 9 times out of 10, or even 99 times out of 100, If you have kids, it's going to be in the county where the kids reside primarily. So most likely it's going to be in your county, and that's where you need to find the attorney, because attorneys are usually county specific where they practice. Our firm practices at the time of this recording in 3 or 4 counties, in Cook County and what we call the collar counties around Chicago. But again, as you're looking for an attorney, you want to find one that does practice in that specific location.
Okay, that's great information to know. I wouldn't have even really thought of that. So, we're always learning something, Bobby.
There you go.
Okay, so let's go ahead and maybe I would say that maybe the next thing is sort of breaking down our understanding. So this is a petition of the dissolution of marriage, and that's a big, that's legal language, that's serious. So I feel like when someone receives language like that, again, and we keep saying overwhelming, but it can be. It's like, okay, this is a legal document that I have been served. What do people need to know about this petition, and what exactly, is it?
Yeah. So when you get served the petition for dissolution of marriage, and petition just means request, and dissolution of marriage just means divorce. So it's a request for divorce that someone has filed with the court. And when they receive it, they'll get it with another document called a summons. And the summons is usually going to be on top. And the summons is the actual legal instrument that is putting the court's jurisdiction over you. And that's what service means. It's merely this formal step that we've created in our system to say, if you want to start a court proceeding against someone, whether it's a lawsuit or a petition or anything where a judge is going to get involved, you need to be served in a way that the court knows that you got proper notification that this is going on. So that's where service is. It's someone personally handing you these documents. And again, the key document is going to be the summons and then that petition underneath. The summons is what says what your immediate obligation is. And you can just read it. Sometimes there's a lot of information you got to parse through and make sure that you follow what the summons is actually saying in its simplest terms. But generally speaking, what the summons is saying is you need to file into court under this case number what's called an appearance and what's called an answer or a response within, generally it's 30 days. And those 2 documents are the key documents that you have a deadline to do. And if you don't do them, there are some repercussions or some things that could happen. And we'll talk about those down the road here.
Well, Bobby, you actually sent over a petition for dissolution of marriage, and I think it'd be really helpful to maybe kind of go through it so we could talk about the kinds of things that people might actually see in it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I apologize to the people listening if this is like way too academic sounding. I mean, there's just a lot of things to go through, little things, and we're really diving into the legalese here. And I think the idea is so that people can understand that it's not as complex or intimidating as it might seem. Like you said, you get this document that says petition for dissolution of marriage, and immediately you're like, wow, those are all words I don't use in the normal speech. What does this mean? What am I supposed to do? So let's break it down here. We'll go through some of the key paragraphs, and I'll break down what exactly a petition is made up of, so that you can understand that it's not as scary as it might look at first blush. So to start, what you're going to see when you look at the petition for dissolution of marriage, at the very top is something we call the caption. And the caption is comprised of which court it's at. So you can see at the top of the one I shared with you, it says 18th Judicial Circuit, DuPage County. So that's going to tell you the county that it's in. On the left-hand side is the parties. So you're going to be listed on the bottom because you're the respondent. The petitioner.
I'm the respondent here.
Yes, you are the respondent. You're the person who got served. You're the person you're the person who's freaking out, trying to go, oh, what am I supposed to do?
Right.
And then on the top is the petitioner. That's going to be your spouse. And on the right-hand side, you'll see a case number. I shared with you one that hasn't officially been filed, so you don't see a case number. But once that's filed, you'll see a case number at the top there.
But the person that would get served would have a case number.
Yes.
Point, right.
Once you're served, everything has been filed. You'll have a case number on there. You might even see a court date printed on there. And an attorney will walk you through what that court date is. In some counties, it's a court date just to check the status of whether a person has been served and where we are at in the process. You don't need to freak out if there's a court date. Perfectly normal. Moving down, the next section is what we call the preamble. It's kind of like a paragraph right at the top of the petition or right under the title. That preamble, it kind of got some old legalese language like hereby and pursuant to. The biggest thing that I pull out of that preamble is the law office, that you can learn who your spouse's attorney is from that preamble. It'll be listed there. And then below the preamble is the initial allegations. So you're going to see listed some paragraphs talking about what is your name, your spouse's name, how old are you, where do you reside, whether or not there are children, the date that you got married. Often that date is wrong. It's not incredible. Like,
no, they don't know their anniversary. That might be one of the reasons they're getting divorced.
Yeah, it's not uncommon that date is wrong. Not a big deal if it's wrong either, because the attorney got sloppy, which happens. You hire the wrong law firm and they'll just copy and paste petitions and they won't update dates that they know ultimately don't really matter. Which is sloppy lawyering. Let me be
I don't
clear.
like that. I was going to say, it was like, yeah, but if you're going to not be precise on that, what else are you not going to be precise on? So I would beware if that was the case.
Exactly, Greer. Exactly. So,
well, and you said allegations, but in like normal terms, when I'm reading at least the first few bullet points here, they honestly, they're kind of facts. They're just sort of,
right.
This is your name. This is your age. This is the date you were married. This is a child that you have together. So it sounds a little less scary, at least.
Yeah. And you know what? I apologize. I fell into being a lawyer for a second there when I used the word allegations, because technically, as attorneys, anything that hasn't been proven in court is an allegation.
I see.
So once it's on the petition, it is an allegation, but you're right. These are facts. There shouldn't be any really dispute of how old your spouse is or where they reside. In certain cases, these issues do come up, not so much the age one, that's easy, but where they reside. Let's say your spouse has, 2 homes, or they just moved, or they're living with their parents. There may be some issue of where they actually reside, but I wouldn't get too much in the weeds on that one at this point.
Sure.
Then moving down, you might see some phrase like upon information and belief. That's a phrase that we use as lawyers when we're really not sure. And we're kind of telling the court, listen, we haven't done any real investigation as far as this is concerned, but we're putting it out there. Don't read too much into that either. For the most part, it's just something that a lawyer might put in to tell the court that we haven't dived real deep on this issue, but we have a feeling that this is true. In a petition, most of these allegations, unless your case is quite dramatic, are boilerplate. And what I mean by that is,
explain that. What's a boilerplate?
I used allegations and boilerplate in a sentence. I should be reprimanded immediately.
That's why I'm here to represent the normal people who are trying to decode all this.
Yeah. So boilerplate means standard things that attorneys put into a legal document that they may apply, but they may not. And a lawyer is just putting them in because it's kind of custom and practice. And so, for example, one of the boilerplate things that we see a lot in these petitions that doesn't necessarily pan out, and hopefully doesn't, is a request for attorney's fees. People get really scared when they see this one. They see in the petition that the other side is requesting that we pay the attorney's fees for them. And they, wait a minute, I don't want to pay their attorney's fees, and Most of the time, it doesn't happen.
Right. I was about to say, wait, you're telling me you want a divorce and you want me to pay for it? Like, what?
I know.
Wow. Ouch.
I know. And we probably should do and will do an entire episode on attorney's fees because it is such a hot button topic. I'll just say in general, you may have to pay attorney's fees if you are the breadwinner, you control all of the money in the situation, and the other side really doesn't have access the way you have access to money. That being said, if you do pay attorney's fees for the other side, most of the time it's treated as an advance on their portion of things anyway. So it's not really like you're paying it. You're just kind of...
When you're splitting everything 50-50, that whatever the attorney's fee is going to be will be a chunk of that.
Right, will be a chunk of your side of things.
Yeah, okay.
But attorney's fees is definitely a hot button topic and can kind of stir some emotions. So when people see it in the petition, they get really concerned and they say, I don't want to pay their attorney's fees.
Yeah.
The other aspect of attorney's fees, and this really this is all about what we talk a lot about on this podcast, and that is that if we're getting into who's paying whose attorney's fees, it means that we've lost sight somewhere and that we're overly litigating this case, and that we've lost sight of the fact that 99% of cases can be settled with negotiation or mediation or some sort of collaborative divorce approach. So the easiest way to ensure that we don't have to pay the other side's attorney's fees is to keep an open mind that this really should be about negotiation and compromise rather than litigation. And I think this is a good time to point out that just because you got served with a petition doesn't mean that your case is going to be this 12-round fight. It doesn't need to be. A case can settle at any time in the process. So they may just be serving you in order to start the process formally, but there's no reason for it to get overly acrimonious and aggressive and all that. So as long as we can control our emotions is kind of the big one.
So it's like, if you're at this point, if you're at this stage, this is the very beginning. And if in there, it says something about legal fees at this point, don't sweat it. That's all going to get worked out. Right. But I do feel like the person that later, if you won't compromise and you won't, come to an agreement, and you're the one pushing to the courts and the trial and all that, sometimes that bites you, and that person may end up paying all the fees because the other person was trying to settle all the way along. So I feel like at the end of the road, that's more of where you're worried about it, probably.
Yeah. I think that's accurate. I mean, attorney's fees there are certainly some injustices that happen, or that it feels like happen when it comes to attorney's fees, where there are even situations where you feel like you're the one trying to compromise and settle, and then you get hit with an order to pay attorney's fees and it really doesn't feel fair. That does happen, but it's unpredictable at the beginning. We don't know. Yeah. You cannot read into this petition and go, oh, I know I'm going to have to pay attorney's fees, or there's no way I'm going to. Wait till you talk to a lawyer about it, and don't get ahead of yourself.
So at this stage of the game, don't stress. This is not what is in here. It does not necessarily mean it's going to happen. Now make a note next to it and talk to your attorney about it, but don't stress, right? Okay.
Exactly. So just a couple more of the allegations or the paragraphs in this petition that I think are noteworthy. One is there's probably going to be something said about the kids, who the primary caretaker of the kids is, and what they're asking for as far as custody.
Mm-hmm.
What they put down on this piece of paper does not dictate what is going to happen in court. It might give you an idea of the approach that they're taking in the case. but it might not. So, for example, you might read in here that the other side is the primary caretaker of the children and that they make the majority of the decisions and that they're asking to be the sole decision maker.
Mm-hmm.
They could put that part in because that is what their attorney always puts in every petition, even if there's kind of a gray area. They could have put it in because that's truly how they feel. That's the position they're taking, and that they want to end up as a primary caretaker. Or they might just put it in because it's like their strategy to put it in there and just start their negotiation on that side. We don't really know. So I'm not going to try to read their mind as an attorney. I'm just going to wait and see what happens when I pick up the phone and talk to the other side on the phone and really figure out what their mindset is. So don't get scared about those custody things that you read in there. You'll know a lot more once you talk to a lawyer about what's actually going on and where your case stands.
Yeah. So again, it's like, get out your pen, get out your highlighter, make a note that you want to have a discussion about it, but don't by any means think that that is what's happening. And that goes for, because after you're sort of talking about, the child and who has time, income and support, that's kind of next in there. So I'm assuming that's another one of those topics that whatever is put in this petition does not necessarily mean is going to happen.
Yep, absolutely. And that was said perfectly, because that was the next thing I was going to talk about, which is child support. Mm-hmm. They're going to put in something there about paying child support, who should pay child support. Again, it doesn't mean anything legally speaking. Just because they put it in here doesn't mean they're going to get it. How child support plays out is directly related to what happens with the custody situation and what is the actual income situation of the parties. So yeah, you're going to read about it in your petition, but don't jump to any conclusions. And the other side of this is that the next step, legally speaking, and we talked about this a little earlier, is the summons says that you have 30 days to file your answer. Well, what's an answer? Your answer, or your response as it's sometimes called, is a paragraph by paragraph response to this petition. And so your attorney is going to draft it up and it's going to say, paragraph 1, we admit what they said. Like, that's true. My name is Bobby. I am 41 years old and I do live in DuPage County. Like, I'm not going to, deny that that's true. And then so we go down each one and we either admit or deny it. And then we kind of level the playing field, legally speaking. And the other way that we level the playing field is we get to file our own petition, and it's called a counter petition for dissolution of marriage. So just because they filed first doesn't mean that you're behind the 8 ball legally, or at least you are. It's only for a couple weeks and it really doesn't mean anything. You're going to have an opportunity to file these same documents, make the same allegations, and get, in front of the judge and be on a level playing field.
Right. And, there's other things in here, like marital property is listed. We did a great conversation. We did a couple of conversations about marital property that you could go back and watch, which is great. So again, it's the same type of thing. So I think that, just knowing that the petition is not, concrete, that at least should give everybody, a little bit of like relief of like, okay, yes, this is, difficult to read or to process, but at the same time, just because it's written here on this petition doesn't mean that this is exactly what's going to happen. But it does show that, okay, this is the time to get serious because the clock is ticking for you to respond and know how you want to respond. Because if you're not happy with what's in here, you need to propose something that you would be a little bit happier with.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's where, if you don't respond, if you just ignore this whole process, if you're like, I'm way too overwhelmed, I don't want to deal with this. This is BS. I shouldn't have to be dealing with this. It's, they cheated on me. Why do I have to do anything or whatever? If you ignore all this, then what's going to happen is the other side is going to file what's called a motion for default. And that basically is saying to the judge, hey, judge, we served them. We did everything we're supposed to do, and they've ignored it. So we want to finish this divorce on our terms, and we just want to get this done. And the judge will do that. And before you know it, the next thing you get in the mail will be a judgment for divorce or dissolution of marriage, and it'll lay out, this is what happened with the property, this is what happened with the custody, and at that point, you better run to the lawyer's office, because while you can undo it, it's not automatic, and you have a very, very short timeline in order to undo it. For all intents and purposes, assume it's a week. It's a little longer than that, but you don't have a lot of time to undo this default judgment, and it's not guaranteed whatsoever. So don't ignore the summons. Once you get served, you got to do what you got to do.
You have to participate at that point. You've got to. And, it's interesting. So, and I know this might sound silly, but, you're saying you have to respond. You have to respond. And I see at the bottom, it says, there's a place, I guess, to sign and whatever. So what would be what exactly do you do to say, okay, I've received it? Like, what is that protocol?
Yeah. So the protocol is, and you don't need to hire a lawyer to do this, although it's highly recommended, because when you do start filing things in court, that it has legal repercussions. So the thing that you do is there's a 1-page document called an appearance, and you get that filed with the court, and then you get the response or the answer filed as well. And then you've satisfied your obligation at that point. There will probably be a court date as well at some point that you'll be notified of, either on the summons or later you may receive something from the other attorney advising you of a court date. And then at that first court date, the attorneys will tell the judge what has happened. The attorney will say, Judge, we filed our appearance, we filed our answer, our counter petition, and I talked to the other attorney, and we've agreed that we're going to exchange the initial financial affidavits. And that's the first little financial step. So that court date, again, not too scary either. Not scary at all in the grand scheme of things. It's
more of just like a check-in.
Yeah, it's just a check-in. In 95% of cases, there is that 5% where things are happening that, the other attorney is filing maybe a motion or an emergency. If that's the case, then yeah, it might be a little bit more serious, and we, again, should talk to a lawyer to figure out exactly what we need to do, one step at a time.
Well, when it comes to the actual petition, which we've kind of gone through, is there anything else that you want to touch on, about our example today?
I don't think so. I think that that's the major stuff. Again, we touched on they're going to make allegations about property. We've talked about property on this podcast, and to understand the property implications of what they're saying or what it actually means. It's going to be very high level, boilerplate, like I like to say. Talk to a lawyer about, what actually happens with the house that we purchased slightly before the marriage that I put most of the down payment on. Like, those are conversations that you need to have with your lawyer to really understand the nuance. So I think we did a good job here of covering the basics, and the high level takeaway is, don't freak out. Talk to a lawyer, make your notes, and have that conversation to really understand what is happening here.
Yeah. And for the person out there that, just to break it down, when they receive it, and obviously we're being calm, we're reading through it, we're potentially, going to talk to an attorney we kind of rebuttal everything and make our own claims. What would you say are the steps of, okay, I've gotten it, now I've received it. What just kind of summarize those final steps once you've gotten it.
So once you've gotten it, mark your calendar. So look at the summons, and there'll be a deadline date on there. It's 30 days, but check this summons to say exactly what it says, because laws change, jurisdictions are different. So mark your calendar for those 30 days. You need to either file that appearance or get an attorney into the situation, hire an attorney, and they will file the appearance. Once you hire an attorney, the deadline obligations are your attorney's job. Now, you need to cooperate and get them what they need, but it's your attorney's job to track all the deadlines, make sure that things are being filed timely and whatnot. So that's one of the big benefits is like, you don't need to get in the weeds. Once you hire a lawyer, they will tell you exactly what needs to happen. And then really the big step to kind of plant yourself in the right place for the rest of the divorce is putting your team together, putting together the people that are going to help support you through this process. Aside from finding the right lawyer, finding the right law firm, finding, you got to find probably depending on your situation, this is something that I recommend, is find a good therapist or maybe a good best friend, or maybe it's your parents, somebody that you can really lean on as far as the emotional side of that. I think that's as equally important as finding a good attorney.
Yeah, absolutely. That is such great advice to make sure that you are surrounding yourself. And I was going to ask you, when you said team, it's like, yes, you have your attorney, but is it family? Is it friends? Having that therapist and also having that therapist, that I'm sure that could be helpful for when you're, going through some of these negotiations and all of these different emotions, being able to kind of talk through that. And family is great, but sometimes our friends, but you can burn them out a little bit. So if you have the means or ability to be able to get a therapist to get some of those things out, it can be helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other professional that you might look out for, which is similar to a therapist, would be a divorce coach. There are people out there that, and the way I think about a divorce coach is, it's kind of like a therapist, but someone who's going to kick you in the butt a little bit more. A therapist can be, I think, a bit more passive in how they approach things. They take their time. They want you to make discoveries on your own. A divorce coach, on the other hand, will be like, hey, listen, I've taken people through this journey, 100 times, and you don't want to go down that road. I would really, encourage you to figure out how to compromise on that piece. So a divorce coach can be a very powerful ally in this process as well.
Yeah, that sounds really wise to have a divorce coach, because they just know so much and would be able to kind of guide you in a good direction. I love it.
It's kind of like what we were talking about before this, of when you go to Disney World, having a guide.
Yes, you have your guide.
Yeah.
Go to Disney and you can afford it. Get a guide.
The same thing. A divorce coach is the Disney World guide of divorce.
I love it. I love it. Well, Bobby, so many great things that we covered today. And, it's interesting, even at the beginning of the conversation, talking about the petition, it feels so overwhelming, but I feel lighter. Do you feel lighter now that we've, talked through it and we understand?
I feel better. I hope the people listening feel better. It's not, I've looked at so many of these and see these all the time and it's not my life. It's not emotional for me. And so, I think people just need to remember that it's lawyers putting together these petitions, and they have a lot of different concerns and things that they're thinking about when they do it. They're not thinking about how it's going to make you feel when you see it, or whether or not it's, going to be diplomatic necessarily. So don't read too much into the petition. Make your notes, talk to the lawyer, and then go from there.
All right. Well, Bobby, as always, thanks so much for being here with me today. Such an insightful conversation, and we will look forward to seeing you guys next week.
Thank you for listening to the Illinois Divorce Guide podcast. We hope today's episode gave you clarity and support as you move forward on your journey. If you found this episode helpful, please subscribe, rate, and review us on your favorite podcast platform. Tune in next week for more insights and expert advice on the Illinois Divorce Guide podcast.